Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to the inaugural 2021 edition of Transmission Talk Tuesday. Look at that. We're starting off, I'd say a new year. We're a month into it already, but whatever. And I already got the name right. So that's a good sign. This is episode number 27, if you're keeping count at home. And we don't have any guests today. Today, you guys and gals, as the case may be, will be the stars of the show, so to speak. We're going to talk about transmitter site maintenance. Uh, the goal here is to figure out a way to help you define what, for your specific sites, is going to be the best maintenance interval, what things need to be done at specific times, see if we can't figure out some tips on how to do some of those things. We'll have a little fun. I've got a list of questions. You'll notice that the registration form this time around had a little spot on it where you could throw in questions to cover in here. There were a few people that threw in some commentary that I'll be calling on. Some other folks have sent me emails here and there, and we're going to involve all of you all as much as we possibly can. One of the things you will notice is that you've got a little control panel, and on that little control panel, there's a place to type questions. And by all means, if you type them, I've got them showing up on a little screen over here to my left, which is why you'll see me looking almost everywhere but at the camera for the next little while. So type your questions in. If you are not shy and feel like unmuting your microphone and having a little conversation, you've got the little hand wavy icon there as well. And I do keep an eye on that. We'll absolutely bring you in. Mike Seaver says he can't hear the audio. So if anybody can hear the audio, you want to type that into the questions response just to make me know I'm not talking to myself. Nothing could be worse. Okay. Oh, Shane's here. Shane's on the road. Okay, well, there you go. I got a whole bunch of I can hear you. So hopefully Mike gets his audio fixed up. We had a record-breaking number of registrations for this, and I see over half of you showed up. So let's get rolling. One other note, if you are an SBE member, then remember that an Autel webinar does qualify for half a recertification credit under category I of the research schedule. So if you're, I should say, a certified SBE member, then absolutely keep track of this in whatever mode you use for keeping score on your recertification. If you're not a certified SBE member, why not? Make it so. All right. That said, let's get rolling. So what I basically did, I threw in a whole bunch of pictures, and we'll do some things. You'll notice I took out that agenda slide. It was starting to get annoying. It hadn't changed in 26 sessions. There wasn't a lot of point. But these are the kind of things that we want to talk about. What are the gotchas? The things that are easy to miss, but can cause big problems, like check and blower belts for cracks and stretching, things like that. The obvious stuff that you don't think about because it's so obvious, it just doesn't really need to be thought about. And I'll pick generator testing because I fired mine up in advance of a snowstorm 2 days ago for the first time in more months than I care to admit. And we'll talk about things like that. What are the must-haves? You know, the absolute, your transmitter site has to have this no matter what. And what else can we do? And one other thing in the other thoughts I've got, how do we sell it to management? And I'll just tap on that real quick. The one thing I use is the oil change analogy. Typically, I emphasize typically because of course it's not true all the time, but most of the time, the station owner or manager is driving a car that's usually not a terrible quality, and as a rule, you can assume that they probably take it in for oil changes on a regular basis because, of course, it keeps it going. Now, the big deal about that, of course, is if they'll take their car in for a regular oil change, why won't they, do regular maintenance on the equipment that brings in the money to the station? And I say brings in the money because commercial, non-commercial, that's ultimately how it works, whether it's through underwriting or whether it's through ad sales. That doesn't change. Here's our first question. How important to use toroids at the transmission system? We will talk about toroids. Mark Boris mentions having a case of bottled water at the transmitter site as long as the building's above freezing. I'll make the argument if the building temperature is not above freezing, you probably have a need for some supplemental heat, just because a lot of gear will run just fine if it's below freezing, but if it stops running for any reason, it may or may not start again. So that's definitely one other thing to mention. Um, there we go. Shane Tobin says, if your equipment isn't comfortable, you're not, or if you're not comfortable, your equipment isn't. I guess it would work either way. If my transmitter's not comfortable, I'm probably not all that comfortable either, but definitely it goes both ways. So number one, the biggest thing, and I've done a couple of presentations on this already, not this year, but in the past couple of months. Um, More and more, especially in the COVID world, we're, oh, look, restart for a Windows update. Maybe we'll just put that one off just a little bit. Anyway, so more and more, we're finding people going out to the transmitter site alone. And it's not just a COVID thing, but it's, more now than it used to be. So I definitely, by all means, recommend you use the things like the Volt Alert, the grounding wand, and the lockouts. Of course, if you're the only one at the site, you could probably get away with leaving the keys in the lockouts. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. All right. One person I was talking to at one point, and I'll leave it up to y'all to decide whether it was a management type or an engineering type, but their question was, why do I need to go to the transmitter site on a regular basis? And so the biggest reasons for going to your transmitter site is, number one, to see what's changed. Little details. Now, by the way, I have gotten a lot of photos from a lot of folks over the years and over the past few months. You're going to see some here that somebody in attendance maybe sent to me. If I didn't put a credit, it's because I did not specifically have permission. There's some assumption if they sent it to me that's going to be used. But if I don't have specific permission to use it, then I won't put a credit on it. So John Huntley says we need to go to the transmitter site to see how well the mice are being fed. And John, that is a good segue. Do you have your mic handy at the moment? If I unlatch your microphone, let's see if I can actually find you in the list. When we got this many people on board, it becomes a bigger challenge. There we go. If you unmute yourself, John, let's have a little conversation about that, because that is one of the biggest things we see when we go to the site for the first time in the spring after it's been hard to get to all winter, is how many critters moved in over the winter. So John, tell me about that a little.
Oh, more than one site that I have visited. The mice have greeted me, and it's just a regular thing. Not even wintertime. One of the things that I do toward the winter is I will actually take the cover off the electrical panel to see how many mice are living in there and how close to a fire that site is. And that's one of those comments. And
Yeah.
As I sent you permissions given for the description on what's posted. Okay.
That's why I picked you, because I knew that was your photo that was up there. This is John's picture, and what you're looking at is a really good reason to visit your transmitter site, to see if some copper thieves have made away with a good chunk of your ground plane.
And they did. And it was replaced by the new owner of the site. And so not as nice as the first one, but at least there's something there.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but mice, I have an advantage where mice are concerned at home because I have cats. But nobody makes it to the transmitter site often enough to feed cats if you were to keep them there, and that's the way I'll say it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see. I had another note in here too. Thanks, John. I appreciate the input on that. And the cats are a good idea too, except yeah, having a cat at an unattended site probably isn't the best for the cat or you. Shane Tobin, you've got a comment here about spot trackers. So I am going to whip down, and I've seen you tracking test equipment on Facebook, but tell me about the spot trackers. How do those work?
So there's these little devices that you can get basically that are meant for hikers and so on. But what they do is you can set up, you push a button basically and it sends out a message. You can send out one of several messages. You can send out either an I'm okay, just checking in message. You can send out a I need assistance message, but it's not an emergency or life threatening. And then you can send out a call the cavalry alarm, which basically will in fact alert law enforcement and rescue authorities and have them come to you and to your location. But it's a tool for making sure that you're checking in with people, telling them where you're at these remote locations and that you're okay. That way, if, for instance, they don't get a check-in, or if they get one of the I need assistance check-ins, or heaven forbid, one of the 911, alerted that there's been a 911 type of check-in, at least they know that there's something going on. Now they come in a couple different versions. Now you can get the ones that are just basically, you power it up, it gets GPS lock, and then you tell it to send, it goes ahead and sends off the message that you tell it to, predefined to a predefined list of people. Or you can get the ones now that are actually two-way text messaging, so it's a little more detail going back and forth, and they're not horribly expensive. I want to say the devices are a couple $100 or so. Or less, and the service the service varies depending on whether it's the two-way messaging or whether it's the one-way stuff. But it's a great tool for just checking in and letting people know that, hey, you're okay out at these remote sites.
Very cool. Now, I know Matt's in the background. He's it's out today, so Matt's my disembodied voice. So if you could, I'm just hoping Matt's listening. I'm saying his name enough times that I should have his attention at this point. But just say the name so he can look it up, and maybe he can post a site link in the chat for everybody.
Sure, it's called Spot, and the URL is basically findmespot.com.
Oh, well, there you go. That's even easier. So Matt, if you want to throw that in the chat, great. But everybody, findmespot.com. Shane, thanks very much for that. That was useful info. Now, I've noticed one comment. One person mentions these wires look a little bit short to reach there's no ground plate. And the sale on selling the need for site visits was the two that have come out to me right off the bat were for air filters. So absolutely, changing air filters is one of the things that you really need to pay attention to on a regular basis. Now, one of the other things you tend to see a lot, although this isn't so much a maintenance issue as it is, these are the kinds of things that you tend to get called to the site for if you don't make it out to do some maintenance. Some of it's going to happen anyway, some of it's going to be lightning. But some of it, if you are out there doing regular hardware checks, doing temperature sweeps of coax and breakers, things like that, then those are the sort of things that we really try to avoid. Not going to avoid it all. Again, if there's a lightning strike that burns a hole in a coax shield, for example, you're not going to make any good or any. You're not going to stop that with maintenance. John Gauze mentions sonic rodent repellents, and I am going to John, since you're here and since you made the mistake of typing it in, and John's from Upper Wisconsin, where I believe you guys are probably looking at about as much snow as we've got at the moment. I think we got about 1.5 feet in the past 2 days.
Hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm
Can you hear
well.
me?
I am. Yeah, you're good.
Great. Yes. When I was up at the tower last, it was a couple months ago, I found about 100 acorns that found their way into our shop vac. And that was kind of the tip off that, we got a problem. But I purchased these, they're made by many manufacturers. These sonic rodent repellers, repellents, they put out an alarm, a high-pitched alarm. So I've been up there, since then, and I have not seen any more droppings or any sign of rodents. So I think that may be helpful. They're not expensive. They just plug into your wall outlet.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen them on Amazon. Our neighbors have started doing some light duty farming in their backyard, which is awesome. But like chicken feed, for example, does tend to attach or attract some rodents. So we've seen a few here and there. In the house, not so much an issue because we, like John, have a fairly healthy collection of cats that look after that, but outside it's good. So thanks, John. That's a useful trip. Mark Boris mentions that mice don't like the smell of mint. And of course, I think we've all heard of mothballs, although, and if somebody wants to hit the hand wavy to tell me one way or the other about this, I'd read somewhere that some types of mothballs can emit some fumes that are not necessarily the best for electronics. So definitely, if anybody has more input on that, I'd be interested. Mike Fertini makes a good note about cleaning the flies and dust out of smoke detectors to avoid alarms and HV lockouts. And that is a really good point under those things that are easy to miss that we don't think to think about. But cleaning out the smoke detectors, and same deal with the batteries. You know, even if you've got an AC powered smoke detector, I'd hope it's battery backed up so that it can trigger an alarm if the power's out. Let's see, Eric mentions an electric traps for mice, but he can get to his sites weekly. And Mario Perez says sonic rodent repellents work very well. Got his at Home Depot. Checking guy wire tension every site. All right, we'll get to that one in a second, Joel, because that's another good one that's easy to forget. And on the topic of easy to forget, when I was telling Matt about this earlier, and of course, Matt, some of you may recall he was on once when we did our session on project management. And Matt's the guy that really kind of keeps all the ducks flying in the same general direction. And I emphasize general direction because there's always those one or two ducks. But anyway, so Matt mentioned this this book called The Checklist Manifesto. I can see it, but I can't say it. Point being that having a checklist, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a Word document that you've got written down, or whatever you've got, having a physical checklist that you can run through and knock stuff off of as you get it done is arguably the best way to make sure that you don't miss anything, assuming you remember to put it on the checklist. So, you know, what do they say to the kids? Make a list and check it twice. And I run and joke in our house, my wife is the list person. If we're going away for a weekend, there'll be 3 lists, one for us, one for the boy, one for everybody gets a list. And Matt's put the link for the checklist manifesto into the chat file if anybody's interested. But I'm the less organized guy. I mean, I guess part of it, I've been traveling so long that I can grab everything I need for 3 weeks on the road half an hour before flight time. She likes to actually be 100% sure that she did remember to pack, you know, little things like socks and underwear or deodorant or all that. I'm more of the I'll buy it when I get there theory. In a transmitter site, that's less an option. So definitely having a checklist of some sort is huge. And now what you put on the checklist and how often you put on it is really going to be up to you. And I mean, the reason I say that is because somebody asked me, and it was one of the questions in the emailed in questions was how often do you change the air filters? And the short answer is, I don't know. In my transmitter site, we've got fairly good air filtration on the building that we go through, but for the most part, because we're low temperate, for the most part, our louvers are shut, and we're just recirculating the inside air for the bulk of the year, except for a month or two in the summer. And I mean, we went up in October was the first time I think anybody'd been up there since July, and the air filter, we knocked the dust out of it, but it wasn't that bad. You know, now other sites, I've been to sites in Cornfield and Iowa, for example, where you would better be changing that air filter every couple of weeks. So it really, really depends on your own specific situation. John Huntley on the sonic pest repellers makes a note too that always use one that has a frequency that varies over time, because the mice will learn to ignore it if it's on a fixed frequency. On your checklist of things to do, Mark Boris, in addition to smoke detector batteries, makes the note that you should change your transmitter controller battery at least once a year. Less so for ours, the newer ones, it can be an issue getting into the AUI, but the transmitter should still function. Other makes, there are some out there where the power goes out and the controller batteries are dead. The transmitter's not coming back when the power comes back. So by all means, put those sort of things, even if they still test good. I mean, controller batteries, ours typically will throw you an alarm, and they'll last 3 or 4 years at least, depending again how long the transmitter's on or off. But the thing to remember here is if you come into snow season in September, October, and can't get back to the site until May, you'd better have replaced that battery in August or September. Otherwise, November 1st, you're going to get the alert that says, yeah, hey, this battery's about to die. And then you're at the mercy of power outages and how much grace was built into the battery monitoring system. So absolutely, the need is there for that. Now, Matt Golston made a good point, and I mentioned it earlier, and this is as good a point as any to bring it in, is how to persuade management that upkeep is necessary. And Matt, I'm going to grab you for a second if you've got a microphone that you can unmute, because you've done a lot on this yourself. I know I've seen a few comments and articles. So if you're able to unmute yourself, great, and do so. And let's talk about that a little bit.
Is my microphone working?
You're good to go. How's things down in Louisiana?
Warmer than it is in this place where you are.
Yeah, I guarantee that.
We have no snow. I think about 60 right now. No, I think in all seriousness, the best conversation you can have with management from a very truthful standpoint and being very respectful is just to have the conversation with them when you first get there about how much time can you afford to have off the air every year? Do you need 99.9% reliability? Do you need 99% reliability? Do you need 90% reliability? And explain to them how many minutes a year each one of those works out to be. And then when they tell you, I want 100% reliability, tell them exactly what that means you're going to have. We're going to have a backup at the site, an off-site auxiliary with 2 different, geographically separate locations. We're going to have a backup studio. We're going to have, backup DJs, all these things, redundancies for everything. And they're going to say, I can't afford that, Jeff.
Right.
And then so you're going to say, okay, I'm going to need to get rid of a few of these things. And you're going to have more realistic expectations of the fact that we're going to have 30 minutes downtime to change a tube every year, or to pull a module that went bad, or whatever. And you're going to have to start setting their expectations.
Right.
Or
and sometimes you can compromise a little. I mean, maybe you don't have a full power on-site backup. Maybe you've got like a VS2.5 or a VS1 that you can throw in the trunk of the car.
Which is what we have in several markets. Yeah.
Right. And then plug it into a 1-bay. I mean, what do we say? The last 90% of your power covers the last 10% of your audience.
And they're very happy with the VS 2.5 on like a 2-bay BEX. And it makes all the difference in the world. And the deal, and that's exactly the deal, is you start just having backup plans, having things in place to where you can have that 99% reliability, which is, I think, if I recall correctly, like a day a year all added up together or something, which means you're off the air for 30 minutes here and 30 minutes there, instead of, telling somebody, well, man, we're going to be off the air 5 days a year. That's crazy. So, but I mean, I've been in markets coming up where you had no backups.
Right. And
that's having a VS 2.5 is a big deal when you had.
Yeah, and I'll say that's the really big deal is just figuring out the level of backup you need. And what a lot of it comes down to is a whole cost operation analysis where you look at the ROI based on what you're billing per month or year or whatever.
Yeah, you just have to explain to them, we got to have realistic expectations on how much you expect us to stay on the air. And if they tell you they need 99.9, you're like, I got to have a backup engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have to have the right to get sick. I have to
Yep.
be able to take vacation. And if you need 99.9% reliability, I can't be on call 365 days a year because I got a month worth of vacation a year and I'm going to take it.
Right. So
You have
it
to have
takes, like you say, expectation management, and a lot of it
Right.
comes back to making yourself part of the management team, which is something that engineering as an industry we've kind of gotten away from, and we really need to get back to.
And while you had me unmuted, I was going to make a comment on that other thing you were talking about critters in the transmitter site.
Y'all see them down there.
The most successful way to seal that up for the least amount of money is to go inside your building, and most of our buildings don't have any windows. Shut the door, turn off all the lights, and look for every crack and crevice where light creeps through. And then go around, stuff those crevices with steel wool, pump them full of spray foam.
Yep.
And
And I mean, I'll take that a step further and go with stainless steel or copper wool instead of regular stainless or regular steel
the
wool.
real good stainless steel, 4/0 steel wool, and then
Mhm.
pump full of spray foam. And then if the spray foam's on the outside, spray it with a little bit of like spray paint so the sun doesn't eat it up. And then, and if it's a really tiny crevice, fill it full of silicone caulk. And the good elastomeric caulk. But if you have any light that you can see in that building that's coming from outside, a mouse can get in there, or a roach, or something you don't want. So, absolutely.
All right, good. Well, thank you very much, Matt. That was useful info. Now, Sean Mattingly mentions, and he also says that he doesn't have Mike today, but check your sites to see which tower renters left without telling you. And that's no joke. I mean, more and more, you're seeing some interest in fly-by-night renters that will leave, and things can really get a little sketchy sometimes. Denver O'Neill makes a good point too, that after you foam in a crack, if you lay some window flashing over top, it's hard for mice to chew through aluminum. So that's another really good idea. Let's see, Ben Labin, an engineer in the Philippines, and Benjamin, by the way, folks, engineer Benjamin Labin, I'm going to say it wrong, but Labin in the Philippines wrote a really good article about site safety, and he sent it to me this morning, too late to incorporate into this, but I'm going to incorporate a lot of it with his permission into an upcoming Waves newsletter, so keep an eye out for that. But he's with FEBC, and one of the things he mentioned was that they have daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual maintenance schedules. So again, if you're an Excel-oriented sort of person, somebody who likes spreadsheets, you build a spreadsheet, put a different tab for the different time sequence, and then you can have you can have your itemized list for whatever period of time that you need. And that is a really good idea, especially because as we've already determined, that will vary from one site to another, depending on the specific environmental factors for that site. So Engineer Lebanon, thank you very much for that. That's a really good one. Let's see, add snakes to the list of critters. Mr. Hayes, you are absolutely right there. A good point there. Mike Fertini says install hardware cloth over the vents outside of the HVAC units to keep mice and snakes from entering. Now, I'm going to qualify that a little because your average 1/4-inch hardware cloth won't stop a mouse. Mouse can get through a 1/4-inch hole. Now, having said that, it will stop a lot of the other critters. So definitely something like that is a good idea. The other thing to pay attention to, and we run into this on occasion with folks trying to screen off transmitters for cabinet radiation, especially now that we got the cell companies looking for specs that are about 0.01% of what's required. But you got to be careful not to add too much back pressure to limit the airflow. So something else to think about. The big deal, and everybody talks about this, and it's been over and over, and I alluded to it earlier, is the big thing for a lot of transmitter sites is generator maintenance. And I mean, I just put my top 5 on this list, checking for leaks, fuel condition, and battery check, belt, et cetera, and so on. One of the things I didn't mention, and I had it happen to my own generator outside the house here a couple of months ago, was went to fire it up, wouldn't start. Turned out that the rubber hose going from the air cleaner to the carburetor had just about totally disintegrated. Now, being highly creative and somewhat frugal and basically not having the proper part at hand, I discovered that if I wrapped the hose with duct tape, it held together nicely. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that for a radio station that's paying your bills. And Mark Voris makes a note about putting hardware cloth over the radiator opening on the genset. And same deal, if you've got an indoor generator with a vent for the cooling air to the outside world, then that's absolutely something. Mark, if you've got a microphone, I'm going to unmute you because you had thrown in a few other really good ideas specific to having water on the site and the hardware cloth to protect from hail. Tell me about you're out in the Midwest, so you see that stuff.
Oh gosh, yeah. Good morning, Jeff, and everybody on. Yeah, with the storms that we get out here on the plains, you've got to think of those little things, and so one of the first things I did with the generator that we put in out at one of our sites was to make sure that the front of the radiator was well protected from hail. You know, manufacturers like Onan or Kohler will have protection for the radiator, but the spacing is so wide that even small hail with a little wind behind it will damage your radiator fins pretty bad. So hardware cloth is good. Hardware cloth also for any openings in the generator. For example, on our generator up north, we have the holes in the bottom of the frame where they would pick up the generator initially to move it. I put hardware cloth over those holes to keep the mice and other critters out. Also, when we were talking about batteries, I learned this here just recently. I use LEA surge protection at a few of my sites, and I found out the units have button cell batteries in them. So you kind of want to look at those too. If your display's gone on that surge protector, take a look inside. There's probably a button cell battery in there.
Yeah.
And then redundancy is a big thing for us here at Spirit. I've got 15 transmitter sites that I maintain, and so I do carry a spare transmitter in the car in the event that I need to put something in at a moment's notice. Now, our higher powered stations on the network, now I've got a 5 kilowatt transmitter that I can put in and keep the station on the air. The translators and the lower power stations, I've got smaller transmitters that I normally carry in the car because they're not that heavy and they're not that big. So spare transmitter, spare codec, if you're using codecs for all your STLs, even a spare processor.
Yeah, and I mean that stuff too. You can, sometimes a lot of us have the processor option in the transmitter, so that's something you can sort of consolidate a little bit.
Absolutely.
Steve Schoen over in Iowa Public Radio makes a note to use a Sharpie to mark the date on the transmitter battery. So that's another good point. I've seen other folks doing something similar with air filters, where if you've got an air filter, for example, in a duct where it's harder to see, then pull off the access panel and write the Sharpie right on the edge of the air filter where you can see it. So that's a really good note there, Steve. Thanks, I appreciate that. Moving on, and Mark, thank you very much for that input because that was useful as well. I have got more things going on here than I've got brain power to deal with. One of the other things I tell folks a lot, and I've beaten this drum, and I'm sure anybody who's watched this has seen this, but I am a huge fan of this little FLIR infrared camera. And the great thing about the FLIRs is that, you can walk into your transmitter site, you can hook it up to your phone, you can aim it around and see what's hot. What's hot at the transmitter site. And another engineer, this was David Creel from FEBC, also sent me this photo, but you're looking at a breaker that has hit the limit of what probably should be looking at on a circuit breaker. And I really like those. Now the FLIR one is the one that I use, and that's of course the one that I've got all my experience with. But there are a whole bunch of them out there, and they've come down in price to the $100 to $200 range. At one point, I don't know if they still make it. I know Josh Bone has a Caterpillar brand cell phone, and it had a built-in infrared camera. So, you know, there are all kinds of options like that, but definitely being able to do a fast at-a-glance temperature sweep. Now, if you've got one of the infrared, I call it a gun, but the Fluke infrared cameras with the point and shoot with the little laser aimer, the one thing to remember with those and with these, as far as that goes, is reflective surfaces will throw them off. Let's see if I can skip back. And you can see, for example, on this one, just my glasses have changed the temperature reading. So you want to, as much as you can, use a non-reflective surface. And the one thing, the tip I tell people is being Canadian, this is the first thing that came to mind, hockey tape. It's black cloth tape. Well, it's available in other colors too. So whatever, I like the black just because it's typically easily visible. But just hockey tape gives you a non-reflective matte type surface that will stick and stay. And you can just aim your laser at that and it gives you a point. Now remember too that a laser temperature gun has got some parallax involved because the temperature sensor and the laser are beside each other. So you do have to be a certain distance away for it to be accurate. And they do give you that data in the manual, so pay attention to that. Aaron Hume on the issue of rodents made a comment, and I'm not sure I have a suggestion for this, but I've had an issue with beavers damming up a creek within 10 yards of one of the AM towers. Had to hire a trapper, and it's been an interesting few months. Not sure what you can do to repel those. Short of trapping and relocating, I don't think there is a whole lot, but that is just one really good idea of the kind of things that that we run into that you don't really think about. You know, I mean, over and above, we've all got the war stories of, you know, going up the hill and there would be a car parked in front of the gate with a young couple in it in some stage other than publicly presentable. And we've all got the stories of folks, you know, using guy wire or shoot tower lights for targets. Greg Smicky. Greg, do you have a microphone on at the moment? Because you've got a couple of good points here, and I know you're a pretty avid snowmobiler and four-wheeler and outdoorsman, so you're looking at this particular scenario from both sides. Okay, Greg does not have a mic. So Greg mentions that putting markers and reflectors onto the guy wires at whatever height typically that you get snowfall, so that if you get a snowmobiler or an off-roader kicking around up there, that they have some visibility of that. Because if you get out there in a bad storm, you know as well as the rest of us how hard it is to see stuff. Greg also suggests driveway markers, although he acknowledges it's a little late in the season. And yeah, I know I've got them at the end of my driveway here. And they're very, very useful for stuff like that. Let's see, Jerry Olson has used conduit goof plugs to seal electrical lift holes. Hail protection, there's a good point from Mr. Huntley. Hail protection applies to HVAC units like the mini splits, the ones that mount outdoors, the wall mount units. Especially if they face in the general direction that your weather tends to come from, it might be a good idea to build yourself a protective cage around it so it doesn't get beat up. Eric Klaus mentions that they catch somebody base jumping their 1,300 foot tower at least once a year. So that's another challenge. And that comes back to more of a security topic. With cameras and strobes and various things to say, hey, you know, just so you know, you are on candid camera type deal. One of the big things that I tell people that they should plan at least once a year is an inspection of the ground system. And the big challenge with ground systems is, of course, obviously they're typically underground. So they're a little harder to see, but especially for those of us in the areas where the ground does tend to freeze, you know, you'll get the frost heaves, and unless your entire ground system up here had to be more than 3 feet below grade. And unless that's the case, then frost heaves, and even then, you're still going to have rocks migrating. Run and joke up here, I grew up on a farm, and our biggest crop was rocks. But so inspecting your ground system, little details. If you're taking over a new site, go through and make sure that the ground is actually ground. Everybody's seen this picture at least once. I will stop using it the day after I retire. But you know, somebody told a guy, owner engineer, that cold water pipe was a good ground, so he found him a cold water pipe, and that's where he connected the ground for his transmitter. Unfortunately, PVC doesn't conduct that well. Picture to the right, I don't know, I haven't looked to see if Matt's online today, but this is a station he contracts for down in Arkansas, and that's the station owner doing the brazing of the ground system. So it's always cool when you get a site where you've got an owner who's involved enough that you can come out, you can point, you can see, and he can see exactly how the return on investment works. So that's a good point. Now, one of the other questions that I got in the emailed questions, let's see, there's two here, and I'm going to rely on you all to answer one of them for me. But there was another good one about what advice for a young engineer just days into getting started in the field. Now, the tongue-in-cheek answer, of course, is always, well, find another career. But no, once you get into this, and I mean, you can't have this much fun and get paid for it anywhere else that I'm aware of. Definitely join your local SBE. By all means, sessions like this, you know, or from folks smarter than me, please. But there are a lot of things to do as far as join some of the Facebook groups. There's a lot of hassle going on, but there's also a lot of intelligent talk. Barry, Michigan has the BDR.net, which is a great resource, and Barry does a Thursday webinar conversational lunch sessions where he gets folks in to chat. On the rare occasion, he'll even grab me to rattle on about something. So definitely learn as much as you can, ask a lot of questions. That's a good way of putting it, Mark. But SBE is an excellent resource. If you're not, Chris, if you're not in the SBE mentorship program, then it's worth joining the SBE just for that. The SBE also recently launched a training program, so it'd be worth looking into that as well. Certainly SBE.org, and I know Wayne Pacina, our president, is on at the moment, so you know, by all means, reach out to the SBE, and they can at least get you a good start. Let's see, what else do we have here? After we get past Matt and Bob doing the soldering, I don't know if he's on at the moment. I got an email from, let's see, oh, there's Jorge. So Jorge, this is interesting because one of the things I go on about, and I'd mentioned it a couple of slides ago, was hardware checks. And it's not just the hardware checks on site, but the hardware checks that you should do when you get a new piece of gear, because I mean, stuff shakes loose during shipping, for one. For two, it's not impossible that somebody missed something at some point. And you know, I've seen over the last 30 years, 3 or 4 episodes of it. Jorge, I've got you unmuted. If you want to unmute yourself, just let's have a little discussion. So this is one of the ones where we talk about one of our pieces of gear that blew up. But go ahead. What do you got there?
Hey, Jeff, can you hear me well?
Hey, very well.
Good. Yeah, so this was a brand new transmitter. It had been on the air for about 3 months, and it seems like the little joint, the 90-degree between the output of the combiner to the output of the transmitter shook itself loose. And eventually it started arcing and melted the transmitter from the inside. There was nothing to indicate this from the outside of the transmitter, obviously. And even after it had failed, the transmitter was basically just, you know, it would try to power up and then double itself back down, and that was it. So as I started pulling parts off of the transmitter, you know, pulling out the amplifier modules, power supplies, and so on, I started to smell more burnt and pulled out parts that were just literally molten copper, molten aluminum, and you know what I mean? It's just, again, brand new part and completely toast.
And what you mentioned was you found a little skittle, the head of a steel screw.
Yeah, that's right. The stainless steel screws that were holding those 4 points together was literally just the heads. So it got hot in there, hot enough to vaporize this.
Now, I ran into one, and this one, in my particular case, it wasn't somebody leaving parts in. It was a part that had gotten dropped in through the output connector when they were, because when we ship these transmitters, there's a plate over the output connection, and on this particular one, you had to take the plate off and install the connector.
That's
and
right.
in the process, they dropped a screw inside the output filter and then put the connector together and bolted it all up, and away they went. And of course, same deal, because it's before the power probe, transmitter doesn't see it, so it goes until it goes till bad stuff happens. Well, thanks very much for that, Jorge. Those were some interesting pictures. Anybody from Canada? Jorge works with GS Broadcast Services. Anybody west of Quebec? Well, pretty much in Canada, all will know Gus Sondermeyer and his crew. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
All right. One other note we got here, and here's a good question, and I may grab Mark Forrest back for this one. Actually, I might grab Shane if he's still with us. And I say still with us, I'm pretty sure he's still with us. He's in some undisclosed location, only known to Facebook. But Tom McNew, sorry, is a fairly new engineer down in Texas. And they hit a freak snowstorm recently that ended up dumping several inches of snow on them. And he discovered that you actually, on occasion, have to sweep out a satellite dish. So, Shane, do you want to unmute yourself and let me know what because you have done a lot of work in Wyoming and Minnesota and all the great places where snow happens. So, what's your best way to keep dishes clean other than going out and beating on them with a broom?
Well, I'll preface this by saying nothing is 100%, right? About the time you think you've got everything, you know, down to a science, well, nature finds ways to to totally thwart you. But the two best ways that I've found for keeping snow off of dishes, and granted, most of these are KU dishes in the networks that I've worked with. So in Wyoming, we had covers on all of the dishes. So they were just like 1.2 meter aluminum dishes, and we just would put a snow cover over them, and that was for the most part pretty effective. The drawback, of course, was they kept getting whipped around in the wind, so it was pretty much a consumable item. You had to, you know, you make sure they were tensioned as best as possible and nice and tight, like a drum on the dish, but they would eventually rip apart in the wind, so you had to make sure that you would replace them, because one that's damaged is almost worse than none at all, because it can trap all of the snow and all that fun stuff in your dish. So my current employer, we have heaters on all of the dishes in these climates. So, and that actually has worked fairly well. You put this heat tape on the back of it and some insulation on the back of these fiberglass dishes. And again, you know, usually like a 1.8 meter dish, KU dish. And also on the feed, there's a little heat tape that wraps around the feed point. And it's actually pretty effective for the most part. So but another maintenance item to check. You want to make sure that it's actually working.
Right.
So,
is it thermostatically controlled? Like, does it automatically come on as you go below zero?
So it's a combination of moisture and thermostatically controlled. So.
Okay. John Van Milligan made a comment about why Wyoming is windy and referenced Nebraska. We won't go any further than that into it. But it's the same reason that the wind in Wisconsin blows from Minnesota. Anyway, Mark Voris makes a really good point too about the and coming back to the newer engineers, Chris and Tom. The Alabama Broadcasters Association has their engineering academy, and that's also a really good resource for well, newer and experienced engineers. I've both presented and attended some of Larry's courses down there, and they've been really useful. So that's a good point. And another kudos for the ABA course. So something else to look into. If you Google Alabama Broadcasters Association Engineering Academy, you'll definitely find that. Another good point from Mike on satellite dishes is looking at bees in the LNA. And of course, I think we've all at this point seen the YouTube video of the guy pulling the cover off the satellite dish with the squirrel storing all the acorns in it. So that's something else to make. Alex Hartman has got a comment here, so I am going to unmute Alex just primarily because I have got a picture of his to abuse him with in a couple of minutes anyway. Alex, what did you mention here about the cooking spray? And I should say, Alex, unmute yourself. There you go.
For the areas that don't see snow regularly, you know, the Oklahomas and Alabamas, where you get some snow, but like 2 or 3 days a year, unlike Minnesota, where we go through 2 or 3 months.
Isn't that 2 or 3 months without snow?
Right, exactly. Or above zero temperatures for that matter. But your favorite cooking spray in a can will help you out through that week without damaging the dish. And because, you know, snow's water, it'll just wipe itself right off and not harm the dish, and not leave a sticky mess or anything like that. I've done that many times. And even in my youth, using an old 1.2 meter satellite dish, the spun aluminum ones, put that on the back of it and go down the sledding hill. It's you can keep going on those. But yeah, the cooking spray trick does actually work.
Okay, that's
like WD-40s though.
That is a really good point. Just flicking down here. So cooking spray is something I hadn't thought of. John Huntley made a comment that he had a C-band uplink where snow built up across the support arms and blocked the feed horn. And I mean, again, like Shane said, you're not going to solve all the problems all the time, but we are going to solve some of them some of the time.
Yep.
Alex, you just stay by the mic. I'm going to leave you unmuted on my end. You can mute yourself on your end. Thank you for the cooking spray. I'm going to grab you back in a couple of seconds because there was another question we got in the email that you'll be able to address. One of the other things that and Aaron Hume mentions that on older dishes with some pitting, that cooking spray may not work as well. So, you know, your mileage may vary, but it's a few bucks to find out. So it definitely is a good idea. One other side note, for what it's worth, Matt Herden, our disembodied voice, has been very busy in the background throwing up links in the chat for just about everything we've covered. So if we've hit anything that there was a reference to a link, that definitely you go look there. Jorge, who was just on talking about this burn up, was mentioning, has anybody else tried Never Wet? He says that seems to work, and he's again coming from central Canada, so there's some experience. Now, one of the other things, of course, you run into is when you walk into a site and you open a panel and you look at the bottom of the panel and you see something like this, and then you look up and see something like that. And the person that sent this one in told me that scenario alone was enough to get them the investment into a FLIR camera, so you can see this stuff with the panel closed. But by all means, these are the sort of things that if we can find them before they look like this, we can save our stations a whole lot of money. So it's certainly worth doing the physical inspection. And of course, anybody who's seen my slides has seen this one before. Now, one of the big things that was only peripheral mentioned, and somebody had mentioned earlier that Oh, and John says that there was a Friday afternoon when that particular burn up happened. So of course, nothing ever burns up on a, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. It's always afternoon drive on a Friday on a long weekend when you've got plans with the family. So yeah, anything you can do to keep that from happening is a good thing. What we're looking here is a static drain choke on a AM tower, and I know Don Jones isn't online today, but that's his old company there, so that dates how old that photo is. Um, One other thing that we didn't really touch on, somebody mentioned having the shop vac as a crucial piece of site equipment. And that is a big, big deal. This is a power transformer out of a transmitter in Louisiana where the and Matt Golston can vouch for the fact the humidity can get pretty warm at times, or pretty high rather. So yeah, it's a really good idea. Going back to the ground system, this is the ground at my house, where after 20 odd years of talking about grounding, I decided to dig mine up and take a look at it and discovered that it was not what you would call ideal. So this is the before picture. I didn't take a picture of it brazed, but something else. Now, one of the questions that I did get in the email, somebody asked, and I'm going to use this, and Alex, this is your cue to unmute yourself again. But so definitely we have the departure items, the things to look at on the way out the door. The transmitter set to remote. Is the door actually closed so it doesn't snow all over the place? But that's not really why I wanted to get on this. The why I wanted to get on this was, so the one question I got was, are there any good video camera systems that can be deployed at a remote site that don't have hacked firmware? And the reason I brought you in, because these Wyze cameras are really good and really cheap, but they're also a little tenuous when it comes to security.
A little bit, yeah. They have Wyze is actually one of the few brands out there that have been very upfront and open with regard to their firmwares. They supply. You can use their stock one by default, uses their cloud service and everything else, but alternatively, they do supply a firmware for every device they make that allows you to run your own NVRs and DVRs with their hardware. They've been very upfront with, here, you can use it with your own stuff, bring your own or use ours, we don't care. So those cameras are still my go-to, especially now I just got them the other day, the V3 version of the camera, where the night vision is improved and the IR specs and everything else. It caught a field mouse running away 25 feet in front of my camera in the middle of the night in the dark.
Well, that's usually what happens in the middle of the night, but yeah.
Right. But unlike the previous version where a speck of dust hitting the infrared would set it off.
Oh, look, I've got the Gen 2 Wyze cameras, and I mean, I've posted video of the cats stirring up the dust in the air, and it looks like little ghosts running around now.
Right.
Either that or we are haunted.
So those types of things, and the third gen is actually made for outdoor, which is really nice. So you can put one on the driveway underneath the gable or whatever you need to do, and then another one at the equipment. Unfortunately, not a motorized version this time, but much better optics.
Right. And I mean, so even the PTZ one wasn't great at low temperatures because right.
Those are, if you need an outdoor camera that can survive 30 below Fahrenheit, you probably should pay a few more bucks than 20.
Yeah.
But the cameras themselves, like I said, I deploy these at every site that I go to and make the recommendation of using them because, what I do is, these things have settings where you can sense motion, which is great. Well, you know what it can also detect? Things that go boom.
Yep.
So, draw a box around the high voltage cavity, and if something arcs over, it will record it and send it to you.
Yeah, well, and a lot of them, and I mean, I know the Wyze ones will, but some of them are sound triggered too. So you can literally, if something went boom, you could get it recording.
Right.
Couple of
all
comments.
of them nowadays can do the smoke detector as well, which is another thing you should be changing batteries in.
Yep, that got mentioned earlier. So a couple of comments. Marcus O'Rourke mentions that Verkada is very impressive for security cameras. Aaron Hume says consider access cameras. They have cloud service, or you can do private server. Cloud is free for up to 10 cameras. Outdoor cameras get pricey, but indoor ones at 100 to 150. He's keeping track of his beaver dam with one of the outdoor cameras.
Nice.
Uh, Aaron,
So yeah,
that
you can
may
do a
have
lot of,
been
there's
the
a lot of
story we
different
needed
security
for
uses out
today.
there nowadays
Yeah.
for security systems and cameras. But if you got multiple sites, definitely these cloud NVR type of things. Okay, the degree of security, talk with your IT administrator to see if it's allowed. And if they have a recommended house, the brand that the company goes with or whatever, that they can integrate with their NVR or whatever. But if you're just a mom and pop like this guy was, these are perfectly acceptable for that. They're very well
Viable options. Yeah.
high community interest around them. So if they do something shady, believe me, everybody's going to know really fast.
Yeah. Now, Barry Michigan does make a good point that the Wise only by default gives you 12 seconds of recording unless you subscribe, and that is valid. It does cost to record more.
Yep.
And let's see. Mark Voris makes a good point that if you do security lighting, then the camera doesn't have to go into night mode. And but again, depending on the camera, some of them work almost as well in night mode as they do in day.
Right,
So,
and on the inside of a building where you typically turn off the lights when you leave the door, you need that night mode vision, just the same.
yeah. Somebody had mentioned that airflow interlocks, and that is a really good point about airflow interlocks on older transmitters. He suggested that we should add them on ours, but we actually do temperature monitoring throughout, so it's less an issue on the newer boxes. However, it certainly is another one of these things that should be inspected. Somebody posted on Facebook not too long ago about a transmitter with the interlock literally duct tape over, and that we started off with safety, but that's something that I really don't like to see. Now,
Well,
Alex,
and in
before you leave,
that particular transmitter, they use those bladder style pressure vanes. The air blows through it and pushes the switch. I've
right.
seen guys just wire right past those things, which in those types of transmitters is extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I've walked into them where there's either been cardboard between the reed switches or paper clips across them, depending on whether they were normally open or normally closed. I'm going to hit this one for a second, and I may drag Shane back in real quick. We're already a little past the top of the hour, but we're almost done, folks. Bear with me. Emergency kits. What are the things that you absolutely need to see at a transmitter site? And I know Mark had mentioned water early on. Anything else that comes to mind? Let's see, Alex, I'm going to grab you again real quick just because you're still here. And tell me if there's anything critical. Most of your sites are drive to, so it's less a concern, but you got one or two on hills that are a little hard to get in and out of.
Yep. The emergency kits always, everybody's like, oh, flashlight. And I'm like, no, candles, heat. We're in Minnesota, it's cold. Make sure you have a igniter, the Boy Scout igniter, if you have to start a fire and camp out in the wintertime, which actually is a thing around here. Can do that. If you get stuck on top of the mountain, you better make sure you can stay there. Shovel, little shovel, camping shovel, always handy.
Chris Jock mentions a large can of peanuts and a case of water at one of the sites that requires a snowshoe hike. And yeah, some source of protein, no matter what it may happen to be.
Yep, absolutely.
If you've got any medical conditions, it's also a really good idea to have spare meds either on you or stored on site, depending on the situation. Yeah, toilet paper, very good one, Mark. Kurt Stepan mentions UPS or USB power bank, another good idea.
Yep. Well, and another thing that nobody ever thinks about is what are you putting all of this stuff into that keeps the mice away, because they'll eat through a plastic tub like nobody's business. Yep. So make sure that the tub that you put this into, whether it be a Rubbermaid tote or a 5-gallon pail, better be stout enough to keep critters out.
Right. And I mean, I'm a big fan of the Home Depot 5-gallon buckets for like $3 plus $1 for the lid. Greg Schmicke mentions having a plastic sled that you can pull behind you to haul your tools and gear into the site when you can't drive in, and that's a good point. Matt mentions Mr. Heater and a couple of grill bottles of propane, and again, doable. I've worked at a site in Fairbanks where the only heat we had for 3 days at -40 was a salamander. But multi-tool, that hit the list, absolutely. I try not to go anywhere without a Leatherman, so that's a good point too.
Also, a couple of things that I've found that are non-traditional that actually help, especially, you know, the northern territories where we get snow, and in the spring and fall it's muddy. Keep a couple lengths of 2x4 in the shed, because you never know when you're going to get stuck.
Yep, and I mean, one of the other things that I've seen a lot of folks is those little slip-on plastic booties, look like shower caps, just so you're not tracking dirt all over the place. Ear protection and hard hats at every site, that's a good point. Shovel, metal trash can to store food and other things that mice shouldn't be getting into, and that's a good point. You can Tupperware all your stuff up and throw it in a big metal trash can and bungee cord the lid down, and you're good to go. So, and
also,
it's
the emergency kit also includes not necessarily items, but knowledge. I'm sure everybody's already know we all go there alone, more so now than ever, and I heard you say that earlier. But you know, the emergency factor is make sure someone knows you're there. And if you say you're going to check in with them in a couple hours or whenever you're leaving, just make sure that they know. And if there's something wrong, you know, make sure 2 people know, not just the DJ at the board, because he's not going to call. You know, make sure a couple of your wife, your kid, you know, your cousin, whatever, someone knows where you are.
Yeah, and that comes back to the trackers that Shane was talking about earlier on too. So definitely useful. And Mark mentions for the hams, absolutely a radio. Aaron mentions that 50 caliber animal cans from war surplus are super cheap, and or army surplus hold a decent amount of gear, and that's a good point. And a mouse not going to chew through one of those either. Okay, at that note, we are pushing the 10 after. Go ahead, Alex.
I said, have you met our mice?
Have you what?
Have you met
mice?
our mice?
Yeah, that's right. You guys are where hantavirus came from. Curtis says he tries telling the cats where he's going, but they only start to care if the dinner is late. And I think I may have some of the relatives to your cats at my house. So true enough. Apple Watch has fall detection that will inform your contacts and emergency services if you fall and become unresponsive. Mark Forrest mentions 9mm. That may or may not apply depending on where you happen to live. But yeah, certainly in some areas that's not a bad idea either. The real goal here is, and Randy Kerbawi sent this one in, and it's like he's laying on an Autel cap. So, you know, the real goal is fewer panics, more time for naps. And that comes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. Make the plan, whether it's a spreadsheet with multiple tabs, whether it's just a single handwritten checklist, whatever it is. But figure out what you need to do, how often you need to do it. Keep a written list that you can actually mark off, and then go ahead and do it. Getting management on board, as Matt was talking about earlier, is huge. And a lot of times I use the oil change analogy because most folks do get the oil changed in their car on a regular basis. So it would make sense you'd be able to explain why it's necessary for them to invest in maintenance on the thing that makes the money that bought the car. Okay, obviously lots of online resources. This webinar will be recorded as well. We've got a newsletter, Waves newsletter. I think Fiona said there's one coming out in 2 or 3 weeks, give or take. Don't quote me on that, but she said it's coming soon. Matt, just for a note, if you're not reading the questions, Elaine says thanks for all the links. And we've got a YouTube channel. So on that note, folks, we are looking at about 10 after the hour. Thanks very much for hanging with me for so long. Oh, David, you are online. David was the one that sent me the photograph of the really hot breaker early on. So thanks very much for that. And folks, stay safe. We'll see you all next time. Bye now.